Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the warm sands and still air of ancient Egypt, a land where time doesn't tick, it trickles and sometimes it evaporates altogether. Picture this, you're barefoot, the stone beneath your sole is still radiating heat from the long afternoon, and the sky overhead is beginning to fade into that surreal lavender you only get above the Nile. Papyrus reeds rustle, a donkey brays somewhere off to your left, and someone nearby is muttering about the moon being late. Because here's the thing, there are no clocks, no ticking, no alarms, no hourly buzzes, not even a single ding, and yet, somehow, an entire civilization keeps moving. From royal ceremonies to grain taxes, everything has its time. Even if that time is measured with dripping bowls or stargazing priests who haven't slept since last week's new moon. You probably wouldn't survive this, by the way. Not because it's dangerous, but because you'd absolutely lose your mind waiting for a sunbeam to hit a temple wall just right before you could start lunch. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of the Nile, not far from Thebes, modern-day Luxor, just as the stars begin to blink into the sky. Behind you, the great limestone temples of Karnak and Luxor stretch toward the fading horizon like frozen waves of stone. They've seen countless pharaohs come and go, and they've kept time through all of them, not with gears or glass, but with rhythm, routine, and ritual. The air smells of clay and myrrh, and somewhere deep inside the temple, incense curls in lazy loops. You're not here as a tourist, you're shadowing one of the timekeepers. That's not an official title, of course, but in ancient Egypt there are those whose job it is to know when things must happen. They don't have wristwatches, they have water and stars, and sometimes the occasional goose. Your guide is a low-ranking temple assistant. He yawns frequently and carries a chipped clay bowl in one hand and a tall walking stick in the other. You trail behind him as he walks toward a small stone basin nestled in a temple corner, already damp from the early evening dew. He sets the bowl into the basin. There's a hole at the bottom of the bowl, and water is trickling out slowly, counting the night drop by drop. This, in essence, is a clepsydra, a water clock, or rather the Egyptian version of one, since the Greeks would later get credit for perfecting it, as they often do. But here, in the desert stillness, the idea is simple. Time passes as water drains. When the bowl empties, another hour, give or take, has gone by. Of course, hour is a slippery word, because in ancient Egypt, daylight was divided into 12 units, and so was night. But days get longer in summer and shorter in winter, which means, yep, the hours change length depending on the season. You might have a 65-minute hour in June and a 50-minute one in December. Imagine trying to schedule a dentist appointment. And yet, it worked, for them. Sort of. Priests would check these bowls periodically, marking when rituals should begin, the first morning hymn to Amun, the midday offering of lotus petals, the long sunset chant as the sky blushed and the first evening star appeared. Your guide scratches his nose and gestures toward the horizon, where the sky darkens in wide, serene bands. Soon, he mutters. You're not sure what soon means here, but you suspect it is more to do with the position of the brightest star, Sopdet, what we now call Sirius, than any human decision. Sirius, by the way, is kind of a big deal. Its first appearance just before sunrise, an event called the Heliacal Rising, signaled the flooding of the Nile and marked the new year. That event didn't need a clock. It needed only clear skies and generations of memory. And that's the magic of it all. Egyptians didn't so much measure time as observe it, like watching a sleeping cat breathe or tracking the slow drift of a boat across calm waters. There's no rush here, no anxious glancing at a wrist, no pinging phones. Time is happening and you're inside it. Still, things weren't always smooth. Historians still argue whether the water clocks were truly precise or just symbolic. Some think they were only used at night when sundials were useless. Others believe they were more like ceremonial props, good enough for approximating, but not for running an empire. Then again, the empire did run. Somehow, through rhythms and rituals and a deep understanding of how shadows fall and stars rise. And while the tools were simple, a bowl, a notch, a stone pillar, they were layered with meaning, constantly refined, and tied deeply to religion. Because here's the key to understanding Egyptian timekeeping. It wasn't about seconds or schedules. It was about alignment, aligning with nature, with the gods, with the great cycle of death and rebirth, sun and shadow, flood and drought. And tonight, you're part of that slow, dreamy flow. You lean against a cool column, the scent of river mud rising in the night air, and listen as a single drop of water plinks gently into the basin below. That's the sound of an Egyptian hour passing. And, oh look, the stars are just beginning to shift overhead. The temple courtyard is quiet now, wrapped in that velvet sort of hush that only exists in places where time slips by without needing to announce itself. You've wandered a little deeper, past a row of columns shaped like bundled papyrus stalks, and you find yourself standing beneath the open sky. The night is cool, but not cold. A soft breeze stirs the hem of your tunic. Yes, in this dreamlike journey, you're dressed appropriately. And somewhere above, the stars begin to do their ancient, celestial dance. Now, remember your sleepy temple assistant from earlier? He's back, and this time he's holding something entirely different. A long rod carved with tiny marks, worn smooth from use. He's leading you toward a flat stone platform, where a few others are already gathered. Some older, some younger, all watching the sky like it's a show only they understand. And in a way, it is. You're about to witness one of ancient Egypt's more poetic forms of timekeeping, star clocks. These aren't clocks as you'd recognize them. There are no ticking hands or ringing bells. Instead, the Egyptians used the slow, predictable rise of stars in the night sky to divide up the darkness into slices. If the water clock was about the trickle of time, this method was about its twinkle. The most important celestial markers were the decans, groups of stars that rose roughly every 10 days. Imagine dividing the sky into 36 of these shimmering landmarks, each appearing one after the other just before dawn. By tracking which deacon was rising, priests could tell not only the time of night, but also the time of year. It was elegant, like having a giant cosmic calendar slowly rotating above your head. Tonight, your little cluster of timekeepers is focused on one such rising. They tilt their heads, murmur to one another, and then someone scratches a note onto a piece of papyrus using red ochre ink. You lean over and try to see what he's written, but, unsurprisingly, your ancient hieratic is a bit rusty. Still, the system makes a kind of dreamy sense. Before mechanical anything, all time was local and astronomical. When the third deacon rises, you're halfway through the night. When the 12th appears, dawn is near. And if you ever get confused, just follow the path of Sopdet, our old friend Sirius, gliding up before the sun in midsummer, glittering like the crown jewel of the sky. Historians still argue whether the average Egyptian really tracked time with the stars, or if this was just a priestly obsession, like knowing all the steps to a dance no one else gets to perform. Some believe this knowledge was reserved for elite temple astronomers. Others argue that farmers, too, looked skyward to plan their days. Or rather, their nights. Either way, you're here now, standing on cool stone, surrounded by people who've memorized more stars than you have passwords. And there's something comforting about that. Something incredibly soothing in the idea that the night sky was once your primary timepiece, a glowing, ever-reliable tapestry that never needed winding. Nearby, a young acolyte drops a pebble into a clay jar. You flinch slightly at the sound. It echoes more than you expect, and your guide chuckles quietly. That pebble? It's not just a random clink. It marks the passing of another hour, and it's time to reset the orientation rod. The rod, by the way, is no ordinary stick. It's an early tool called a merkhet, a kind of ancient sighting instrument. 2 merkhets aligned with the North Star and suspended by a plumb line helped the Egyptians establish a straight north-south line. This wasn't just helpful for temples and tombs, it also grounded their star-gazing time system. By sighting stars that passed that meridian, they could note their precise movements throughout the night. Precision, in a society without seconds, was all about consistency. Of course, things didn't always go to plan. Clouds happened, sandstorms happened. There are records, fragmented and vague, suggesting priests sometimes disagreed over which deacon had actually risen and at what angle. One ancient letter translates loosely to something like, "Tell Nacht I disagree," and the 5th star was late. So even among sky watchers, there were scheduling arguments, and we've all been there. But tonight is clear. The stars are sharp, almost unnervingly still. No city lights, no car alarms, just the rhythmic murmurs of the temple assistants, the shuffle of sandals, and the occasional grunt from a dozing guard leaning against a wall. Time here doesn't feel like something that presses down on you. It floats. You lie down for a moment, flat on the warm stone, staring up at the night sky. It's the same sky those priests saw, more or less, and that's a quietly staggering thought. The same Sirius, the same Orion, called Sa by the Egyptians, the same Milky Way, which they saw as a heavenly version of the Nile. Even now, the stars are slowly sliding past invisible markers, etching the passage of night with a grace no wristwatch could ever compete with. And as the next deacon rises, the assistant beside you nods. Another hour has passed. You didn't hear a chime. You didn't feel a vibration in your pocket. You just noticed, slowly, gently, just like you're meant to. You're up before the sun. Well, sort of. The line between night and morning is blurry here, especially when you're trailing behind a man whose job depends on getting ahead of both. Your guide, the same slightly dusty, perpetually tired temple assistant from before, is rubbing sleep from his eyes with one hand and balancing a leather scroll case under his other arm. Timekeeping, as it turns out, doesn't get holidays. You follow him into a small side chamber tucked behind one of the temple's main halls. It's darker here and cooler. The thick stone walls are excellent at ignoring the desert's mood swings. Inside, rows of clay tablets, measuring sticks, chipped bowls, and painted star charts cover a long wooden table. This, he gestures with a dramatic sigh, is his office. The role of a timekeeper in ancient Egypt isn't glamorous. You're not draped in gold or fanned with palm fronds. You're more likely to be sunburned, ink-stained, and incredibly punctual. And for good reason. Almost everything in this civilization, from sacred rites to grain rations, depends on timing. Today, the assistant is checking and adjusting one of the most important tools in his modest collection, a water clock or clepsydra. You already saw one in action the other night. Remember the bowl slowly emptying into a stone basin? This one's fancier. It's a deep carved vessel with markings along the inner walls to indicate passing hours. He fills it with water from a clay jug, cool, clear, carried all the way from a nearby well, and watches as it begins to drip out from a tiny hole in the bottom. Plink, plink, plink. You'd think this process is as straightforward as watching water drain, but that would be optimistic. These clocks, especially the older ones, weren't always accurate. Temperature affects the flow. So does sediment. So does, frankly, how level the ground is. The assistant uses a reed leveler to check the floor and wedges a scrap of papyrus under one side of the clock. Even in the ancient world, a little improvisation went a long way. Historians still argue whether these water clocks were used more for nighttime temple rituals or for daytime civic coordination. Some think they were strictly priestly tools, tied to lunar ceremonies and timing offerings. Others believe they had broader bureaucratic uses, keeping track of time for court sessions, military drills, and even labor rotations at construction sites. And it makes sense, really. In a land where stone monuments took decades or centuries to build, knowing when your shift started was kind of important. Our assistant finishes his calibration and steps back to squint at the water level. He jots something onto a palm-sized tablet in the smooth, looping curves of hieratic script. It's not just water in that clock, it's data. Time is being recorded, one drip at a time. Beside the clock sits another intriguing object, a shadow clock or sundial's grumpier cousin. This one's made of polished limestone and looks a bit like a T-square stuck on a flat slab. It's designed to measure the sun's movement using the shifting length and angle of its shadow. When it's not nighttime, this is your daytime equivalent of an hourglass. Just don't use it on a cloudy day or while a cat is sunbathing in front of it. Cats, it turns out, have no regard for chronometry. You're allowed to try your hand at marking the shadow. The assistant grins sleepily as you kneel beside the slab and use a reed pin to trace where the tip of the shadow falls. It's not very precise and your line wobbles, but for a few heartbeats, you are an ancient Egyptian timekeeper. And here's the thing, despite all these tools, most Egyptians didn't carry any personal sense of time the way we do. No one was counting minutes or micromanaging their morning. Time was collective. It was felt in rituals, marked in song, observed in the landscape. There was no meet me at 10:15. There was we'll start when the sun's halfway to the tamarisk tree. Still, the work of the timekeeper mattered. It gave order to the seemingly unhurried rhythm of Egyptian life. These quiet observations, how long the sun takes to rise above a wall, how quickly water drains, became the skeleton of their calendar, their rituals, their empire. And not just for the living. Timekeeping had meaning for the dead too. The Book of the Dead, which is less metal than it sounds, is filled with references to time, journeying through 12 gates of the night, meeting the sun god Ra at each hour, and resetting your soul according to the cosmic clock. Even in the afterlife, punctuality counted. You glance back at the water clock, still trickling patiently. The assistant is brewing something over a tiny clay flame, some blend of barley and herbs that smells suspiciously like overcooked tea. He offers you a sip. It tastes like what you'd expect if someone left cereal in warm water overnight. But you're polite. You nod. He nods. Outside, the first pale brushstrokes of dawn are creeping across the sky. Another day is beginning, not because your phone says 6 a.m., but because the light says so. And here, that's enough. You squint into the sunlight as you step back out into the temple courtyard. The stones are already warming beneath your feet, and a fine dust glitters in the light like lazy fireflies made of sand. The city is stirring now. Well, slowly. Nothing here jumps out of bed in a panic. Even the cats stretch as though they're waiting for the universe to catch up with them. Your guide reappears, holding what looks like a carved limestone plank with a stubby vertical peg sticking up from one end. It's a sundial, and he's treating it with a kind of quiet reverence, as if it's both a scientific tool and an old friend with a somewhat unreliable personality, which honestly it is. This model is portable, relatively speaking, and probably used by temple administrators, traveling scribes, or anyone who needed to pretend they knew what time it was when asked. It works by casting a shadow from the peg, or gnomon if you want to impress your next trivia team, onto the flat surface, which is marked with hour lines, or, well, something like hours. The catch? These ancient Egyptian sundials told time very differently than modern clocks. Instead of measuring 12 60-minute hours no matter the season, their sundials tracked 12 daylight hours, regardless of how long the day actually was. So in the summer, when the days stretched luxuriously long, each hour ballooned with them. And in winter, your hours were as short and sleepy as a goose after lunch. You kneel beside the sundial and try to trace the movement of the shadow. It's not fast. This isn't a second-by-second device. It's a quiet, gradual transformation, almost like the stone is sighing beneath the sun's gaze. You begin to understand why ancient Egyptians didn't rush through anything. Their technology simply refused to move quickly. Still, there's beauty in it. The shadow leans to the west as the morning deepens, casting itself across faint-etched grooves that have seen 100 seasons come and go. The markings are rough but functional, likely tuned to the local latitude, since sundials weren't one-size-fits-all. If you traveled north or south, the angle of the sun changed, and suddenly your trusty sundial became more decorative than useful. Historians still debate whether Egyptians standardized these sundials across different regions or if they just eyeballed adjustments. Some speculate that they carved seasonal markers into the stone to compensate. Others believe that, much like the star clocks, the sundial was more symbolic than scientific, more about rhythm than exactitude. Your guide scratches his chin and points to a shaded corner where a larger, upright version of the sundial looms. This one doesn't travel. It's embedded in the temple courtyard floor, positioned to align with specific architectural features, columns, statues, even doorways. Each morning, the sun slices clean across these features like a cosmic calendar, telling you not just the time, but whether it's a festival day, a planning day, or a day for fasting. Light here is not just illumination, it's instruction. You watch as a priest walks slowly across the courtyard and pauses just as the shadow of a palm trunk touches a particular carving on the floor. Without a word, he nods and disappears into the temple. Apparently, the time for a ritual has arrived. And just like that, the sun told him what to do. No alarm, no announcement, just light touching stone. It's all very precise. And also not. Which is to say, it's predictably imprecise. Egyptian timekeeping didn't aim for absolute accuracy, it aimed for alignment, with the stars, with the river, with the gods. The point wasn't to know the exact minute something happened, but to be in sync with the natural world and its endless loops. Of course, that doesn't mean mistakes never happened. Just yesterday, apparently, the high priest misread a shadow and began the midday prayer at what was very clearly still second breakfast time. The younger priests went along with it, of course. Who's going to argue with someone holding a gold staff? But the kitchen staff was not pleased. You overhear one muttering about burnt lentils again as you pass. And yet, no one's panicking. No one's screaming, "We're late," into a conch shell. The world continues turning. The sun continues its slow march across the sky, dragging shadows along behind it like sleepy pets on leashes. You wander past a group of children playing in the dust with a painted stone game board. One of them has scratched little time symbols into the edge of a tile, mimicking the sundial lines. It's charming and revealing. Even children, barely tall enough to reach the temple's offering table, understand time here, not as a strict measurement, but as a lived experience. You don't wear time, you breathe it. Before you leave the courtyard, your guide places the portable sundial back into a niche in the wall. He gives it a little pat, almost like you'd pat an elderly cat who just did its best, and smiles faintly. Job done, at least until noon. And as you step into the growing heat of the day, you realize something. You haven't looked at your phone in hours, not because you forgot it, but because here, under this vast and ancient sky, time isn't something you carry, it's something you walk beside. You wander into the temple's inner sanctum, where the air is thick with incense and mystery. The scent is sharp, resin, cedar, and something vaguely sweet, like dried figs left too long in the sun. The stone walls muffle every sound, and even your footsteps seem to hesitate before echoing. This is the domain of the high priest, the place where the divine calendar is kept, not in scrolls, but in gestures, in song, and in the synchronized dance of daily ritual. As you settle quietly in the shadows, you hear the soft peal of a bronze bell. It's delicate, almost shy, but its chime carries a strange authority. One priest bows, another begins a chant, and just like that, a morning ceremony is underway. You glance up at a high window, its shaft of light strikes a particular floor tile, and the timing suddenly makes sense. This is how they do it. Temple rituals in Egypt were time-locked performances, played out not by mechanical precision, but by the flow of sunlight and songbirds. Bells, drums, even the first chirp of a sacred ibis outside could act as cues. And the priests? They didn't just know what time it was. They felt it in their bones, in the echo of footsteps on stone, in the way the light changed color as it filtered through ancient alabaster. There was no ding-ding to alert you to your morning commute. There was the hour when the sun touched the altar's edge, and that was your signal to wash your hands, offer the first lotus petals, and sing praises to Ra, who had once again emerged victorious from the underworld. But it wasn't always so clear-cut. Historians still argue whether the timing of these rituals was fixed to natural phenomena or more loosely guided by internal temple schedules. Some papyri suggest highly regimented sequences, minute by minute. Others hint at more interpretive flow, depending on season, sky, and staff availability. Apparently even sacred schedules could get flexible. Back in the sanctum, a second bell rings. This one's lower, more resonant. A priest steps forward, holding a handful of myrrh, which he sprinkles over hot coals. The smoke rises in a silvery spiral, catching the morning light. Your guide leans over and whispers, "This is the hour of incense." You ask, silently, with a raised eyebrow, how he knows that. He just taps his ear and grins. The acoustics shift at this time of day, he explains. The temple is built so that at specific sun angle, certain corridors carry sound differently. Not just a timekeeper's dream, but an architectural sundial made of echoes. You lean against a pillar and feel a strange sense of calm. Here, time is not your enemy. It's not rushing past or slipping through your fingers. It's wrapping itself around you like a soft shawl. You don't chase it, you join it. Even the animals know the rhythm. In a garden just outside the sanctum, a flock of sacred geese waddles across the grass precisely as the third bell chimes. Coincidence? Probably not. These birds are trained, sort of. Or maybe they've just lived long enough to memorize the temple's gentle beats. One particularly judgmental goose pauses to stare at you, as if questioning your contribution to the day's cosmic alignment. You bow, just to be safe. Another priest, younger and eager, enters carrying a long reed scroll. He begins reading quietly, lips barely moving. It's a calendar of offerings, listing which gods receive what on which day and at what time. The scroll is illustrated with stars, plants, and tiny painted figures holding up bowls of wine, milk, or oil. It's less of a schedule and more of a cosmic to-do list, but beautiful, absolutely beautiful. You move closer, peeking over the priest's shoulder, and your guide chuckles. "This is the hour of curiosity," he murmurs. Apparently, you're not the first outsider to want to peek at the divine calendar. The scroll references hours of Ra, dividing the day into segments aligned with the sun's celestial journey. At each hour, Ra occupies a different boat, navigates a different section of the sky or underworld, and interacts with different gods. If your ritual isn't aligned with the right hour, you risk offending a god mid-voyage, and nobody wants that. It's all deeply symbolic and deeply intentional. Time in Egypt isn't abstract, it's embodied. Every moment is an opportunity to reflect cosmic order, or ma'at, in human affairs. Timekeeping, then, isn't just practical, it's sacred. Even the temples themselves reflect this. Their architecture is aligned not just to cardinal directions, but to celestial events. Solstices, equinoxes, star risings. Light enters certain chambers only on specific days, casting beams that touch carved figures of gods precisely as a priest raises a bowl of wine. Coincidence? Again, very unlikely. These were stone calendars, built for eternity. Your guide finally gestures for you to follow him back into the outer courtyard. As you pass through a shadowed hallway, you glance back once more. The third bell chimes, and the last note hangs in the air a little longer than necessary. Like it, too, doesn't want this moment to end. You step into the light, and time, like incense, drifts behind you. The sun is climbing now, but not hurriedly. It stretches itself across the city of Thebes like a cat draping over a sunlit windowsill. You feel it on your shoulders, warm but not punishing yet. The streets beyond the temple are beginning to fill with soft sounds, sandals brushing dust, donkeys snorting as they are reluctantly nudged toward duty, and vendors arranging bread on reed mats. And above it all, watching silently, is the sky. Your guide leads you to a quiet rooftop, just above the priestly quarters, where the view opens up like an enormous sundial in every direction. This, he tells you, is where the real timekeepers live. Not the water bowls or sundials, but the stars themselves. And today, you'll learn what it means to be watched by them. You sit cross-legged beneath a linen canopy, watching the last traces of dawn fade as the sky turns that bright, ancient blue that seems too clean to exist in modern times. Your guide gestures upward with the kind of reverence people usually reserve for temples or particularly good figs. He starts with the deacons again. Remember those star groups from earlier? You're about to get reacquainted, but this time in broad daylight, when their absence speaks just as much as their presence. The Egyptians believed the sky was a vast goddess named Nut, who swallowed the sun each evening and gave birth to it every morning. That's a poetic way to explain the cycle of time, and also a reminder that their understanding of the universe wasn't just mechanical, it was mythic. Timekeeping was theology in motion. The deacons, 36 star groups, each governed a 10-day period, and were essential to both the calendar and the night clock. In the hours between sunset and sunrise, a different deacon would rise approximately every 40 minutes. With 12 deacons visible over a single night, priests could measure the night's passage even when all sundials were asleep. You lie back on a woven mat and imagine it, the stars rising one after another like actors stepping into their cue, the night divided not by bells but by constellations drifting across the sky like silent hieroglyphs. But it's not just stars. There's one in particular that's almost a character of its own in the Egyptian night. Sobdet, or as you'd know it, Sirius. Every year Sirius would rise just before the sun, what astronomers call the heliacal rising, marking the start of the Egyptian New Year and the imminent flooding of the Nile. This event was so precise, so dependable, that it became one of the oldest known calendrical anchors in human history. Farmers planted, priests planned, builders began their monumental projects, all because one star blinked in the eastern sky. Historians still debate just how widespread this celestial timekeeping was. Some argue that only elite temple astronomers could interpret the deacons accurately, while others believe village elders and even farmers were attuned to these cosmic rhythms. Either way, you get the sense that everyone, high priest or humble potter, looked up with at least a passing sense of awe. As you squint toward the eastern horizon, your guide unrolls a narrow wooden panel, painted in blue, gold, and faded red. It's a star chart with tiny human figures representing the deacons, each holding a scepter or an ankh, and all marching in perfect celestial procession. Some coffins even had these painted inside their lids, because as it turns out, the stars were also your travel companions into the afterlife. You run your fingers across the painted wood. It's smoother than expected, polished by time and careful hands. One of the figures wears a leopard skin robe and holds a curved staff, likely representing Horus in the horizon, a nightly form of the sun god Ra. Your guide explains that each hour of the night was ruled by a different god or guardian. Passing safely through the night, especially in the underworld, meant knowing who these guardians were and what offerings or spells they required. In a sense, even the dead had to keep time. This blend of astronomy, religion, and art creates a worldview that's hard to compare to our modern relationship with time. Today, time feels cold, digital, impatient, but for the Egyptians, it was alive, full of personality and meaning. Every moment of starlight was part of a much larger cosmic story. And as the sun climbs higher, your guide shades his eyes and smiles. You've just learned how the Egyptians told time using nothing but sky, myth, and a little math. It's humble, yes, but it's also kind of magnificent. Then, as if on cue, a faint chant begins below. You recognize the rhythm, one of the same morning prayers you heard in the temple courtyard. The timing aligns perfectly with the last deacon's rise. It's not coincidence, it's centuries of practice, a civilization flowing with the sky. And maybe, just maybe, you feel yourself slipping into sync with it too. The rooftop breeze fades as you descend into a chamber far older than the temples you've seen so far. Your sandals click softly against the stone steps, and the air grows cooler, denser. A narrow passage gives way to a small, pitch-dark room with a low ceiling, and once your eyes adjust, you realize you're not alone. Above you, faintly illuminated by a torch your guide has just lit, is a ceiling painted with stars. Not just scattered dots. This isn't abstract art. It's a cosmic map, carefully arranged and meticulously labeled with tiny hieroglyphs. Above your head stretches a full star clock, or as some call it, a diagonal star table, set into the inside of a coffin lid, or more precisely, the replica of one. The original lies sealed in a tomb miles away, but this copy is precise and hauntingly beautiful. You lie on the floor, yes, on purpose, and stare up at it. Rows of figures march across the painted surface. Some are stars, others are gods, and a few are both. They lean diagonally across the ceiling in sets of 12, one for each hour of the night, each marked by the appearance of a specific deacon star group. Imagine this. You're an ancient Egyptian priest lying in a dark room, centuries before telescopes or GPS. You watch the stars rise over the eastern horizon one by one, and as each one appears, you chant its name, mark its position, and know an hour has passed. This was the essence of the star clock coffin, a tool for mapping the passage of time in the most eternal of places, the tomb, because even in death, Egyptians believed time didn't stop. You still had to make your way through the 12 hours of night, just as Ra did, defeating chaos and re-emerging with the sun. The fact that such a device existed at all is a testament to how deeply intertwined time and the afterlife were in Egyptian belief. The dead were not simply asleep. They were in motion, traveling through time, step by cosmic step. Historians still debate how precisely these star clocks functioned. Some believe they were ceremonial, decorative, symbolic tools to remind the living of the deceased's journey. Others argue they were instructional, like a user's manual for navigating the hours of eternal darkness. A few fringe scholars even claim these clocks were used in reverse, helping priests determine when a person died by aligning star positions backward. Regardless, what's clear is that these diagrams weren't just scientific, they were poetic. The stars weren't just objects, they were deities, ancestors, guides, and each had a role to play in the great nightly drama of death and rebirth. Your guide points to a small figure painted near the center of the panel. A woman, arms outstretched, stars on her body, Nut, the sky goddess again. She swallows the stars in the morning and gives birth to them again at dusk, in a cycle so serene and endless it could lull you to sleep. And maybe that's the point. Here, beneath the painted ceiling, you find yourself breathing more slowly. You're not worried about the time, you're in it, floating gently from one star hour to the next. But there's more. Painted along the edges of the ceiling are calendrical notations, listing festivals, lucky days, unlucky days, days for fasting, days for feasting. It's not a to-do list, it's a cosmic rhythm sheet, and every hour, every night, every rising star is part of the divine choreography. You feel it now, the scale of it. How Egyptian time wasn't just about clocks or calendars, it was about alignment, with the stars, the sun, the gods, and each other. A soft scraping sound echoes as your guide opens a small niche in the wall. Inside is a ceremonial headrest, what they used in burials, carved from wood and painted with protective symbols. He offers it to you almost jokingly and gestures toward the painted ceiling. You lie back on the cold stone, the headrest surprisingly comfortable, and look up once more. You imagine being entombed with the stars above you, not in fear, but in peace. The deacons will rise, the journey will continue, and you'll know the hour by the whisper of a star passing across Nut's belly. It's not scary, it's soft. Time here is your companion, your guide, your lullaby. And as your guide extinguishes the torch, plunging the room back into darkness, you can almost hear the stars begin their quiet procession once more. You're blinking in the sudden sunlight again. The transition from star-painted tomb to open desert is jarring at first, like being tugged from one world into another. You shield your eyes and the bright sky seems impossibly high and still. But even here, out among the dust and wind, time is ticking. Your guide waves you toward a shaded lean-to made of woven reeds and palm rope. Beneath it, a group of laborers is gathered. They're lean, sun-wrinkled, and laughing in that particular way people laugh when the day is already hot and their tasks are as endless as the horizon. You're about to learn how time worked outside the temples where rituals bowed to the gods but survival bowed to the sun. This is a work site, nothing as grand as the pyramids or the Valley of the Kings, but something much more everyday, a storage house being rebuilt after flood damage. And the workers here? They're not using deacons or incense bells to keep track of time. They're using something far more practical, the body. See, when you're stacking bricks under the noonday sun, you don't need a bronze water clock. You need to know when to rest, when to drink, and when to stop before the heat turns you into something resembling dried fish. Ancient Egyptian workers broke their days into broad labor periods, loosely framed by the movement of the sun. The day was divided into 12 daylight hours, remember? But the actual pace of work was often set by natural indicators. The angle of shadows, the crowing of birds, or even the sound of market gongs echoing from the city. One man, leaning on a basket of limestone chunks, taps his forehead and says something your guide translates roughly as, "The third shadow is the soup hour." And sure enough, a woman arrives moments later with a pot of lentils still steaming. These are the unofficial clocks, what you might call belly time. When you're hungry, it's lunch. When the sun touches that rock, it's break time. When the donkeys start braying more than usual, it's probably late afternoon. And here's the brilliant thing, this informal timekeeping still works. It's responsive, human-scaled, flexible. You don't have to check your phone, you just pay attention. You look, you listen, you feel. Of course, the overseers do carry tools. One has a battered shadow stick, a kind of portable sundial you've seen before. He uses it occasionally, more to keep record logs for rationing than to bark orders. Because yes, even in ancient Egypt, work was tracked and paid in Deben, or work units often measured in grain, beer, or linen. Historians still argue whether laborers were paid daily, weekly, or according to some hybrid lunar schedule. The Deir el Medina records, the best preserved worker logs we have, suggest a bit of everything: fixed festival holidays, variable work days, and the occasional "oops, we forgot to pay you" moment scrawled apologetically on papyrus. You crouch beside one of the stonecutters. His face is weathered, his hands calloused. He wipes his brow, sips from a jug, and points upward. You follow his finger. The sun has just begun to tilt westward. He smiles. Time to start wrapping up. There's a horn blast in the distance, probably from a scribe in the village center, and the group begins their practice routine of cleaning tools, folding cloths, and laughing about someone who dropped a jar of beer into a trench last week. Again, you notice that no one seems stressed about the time, no panic, no countdowns, no buzzing devices whispering urgency into their ears. They're working, but they're not being chased by time, they're moving with it. And that's something the modern world has mostly forgotten. You and your guide wander toward the edge of the site where an older man is sitting beneath a fig tree, sharpening a reed stylus with practiced slow motions. He's a scribe, keeping the daily log on a flat clay tablet. He gestures for you to sit beside him. He's writing the date in what's known as civic time, a calendar date based on a 365-day system with 12 30-day months and 5 extra festival days at the end. But even as he presses the stylus into the clay, he mutters about the lunar calendar being more accurate for certain things, like temple feasts and river floods. The Egyptians, you realize, didn't just have one calendar. They had 3, civil, lunar, and solar religious. They overlapped, tangled, and occasionally caused hilarious scheduling conflicts. Historians still debate how these 3 systems coexisted in daily life. Did ordinary people know all 3? Did temple priests correct civil dates based on lunar observations? One papyrus includes an angry note from a priest to a mayor, scolding him for scheduling a festival on the wrong day because he followed the government calendar instead of the god's calendar. Relatable, the scribe finishes this tablet, sprinkles a bit of sand to dry the clay, and leans back against the tree with a groan that could shake mountains. He points toward the sun again. The light is golden now, stretching longer across the earth. One of the women down below is already lighting a cooking fire. Another day has passed, not by clock hands, but by shadows, sweat, and shared glances. And you're starting to feel the pull of it too. Not tired exactly, just folded gently into the rhythm of things, like a leaf caught in a river that never rushes. You don't need to check your watch. You already know the hour. You make your way back through the dusty village paths, following your guide as the day folds into its warmest hour. The light is amber now, softened at the edges. Chickens dart between baskets. Someone is singing off-key in a nearby courtyard. And at a small open-air kitchen tucked behind a shrine, you catch the scent of baking bread so rich and thick it feels like it could hold time and place. Your guide pauses beside a small shaded platform where an elderly woman is kneeling over a tray of small round loaves. She nods politely, barely glancing up, too focused on the hot clay oven that dominates the courtyard. But her timing, it's impeccable. She turns each loaf exactly when the sunlight slips past a carved notch on the wall, a domestic sundial of sorts. You're about to witness a slice of timekeeping not for gods or builders, but for bakers. In ancient Egypt, the most common tasks, baking, brewing, weaving, feeding children, were often timed not by hours, but by natural cues. Bread, for example, wasn't baked for 20 minutes at 375 degrees. It was baked until the shadow on the courtyard wall fell between 2 bricks, or until the dog started whining for scraps. In other words, ritual meets instinct. You kneel beside the woman. She points to the shadow creeping slowly along the oven's rim and explains, through a combination of gestures and your guide's translation, that she starts her dough at the second heat. When the stone is warm enough to burn your finger but not blister it, she flips it at the falling shade mark, and she knows it's done when a nearby pigeon flies up to its nest. Every day, without fail. This isn't superstition, it's a finely tuned relationship with the environment, forged through centuries of observation and oral tradition. It makes you wonder what we've lost with our thermostats and timers. Historians still debate how widespread this type of informal timekeeping was. Some say it was the norm, especially in rural villages. Others argue that temples and estates enforced stricter scheduling even in domestic tasks. Still, clay tablets show that oven marks, sun angles, and even animal behavior played a major role in managing daily chores. Your guide picks up a small ceramic pot from a shelf. Inside is beer in the making, barley mash, bubbling faintly, another form of liquid clock. The brewer, a teenager lounging under a fig tree, predictably uninterested in your wide-eyed fascination, shrugs when you ask how she knows it's ready. She jabs a thumb toward the sun. When it passes the acacia, your guide translates, it's oddly comforting. The idea that an entire civilization, so advanced in mathematics and astronomy, also trusted birds, shadows, and bubbling barley to tell them what to do, as if technology and intuition were never enemies. You move into another home, more shaded and cool, where a woman is threading linen into a loom. Her fingers are fast and sure, pulling threads taut with a rhythm that seems, frankly, musical. When asked how she paces herself, she laughs and explains she hums a counting tune, 12 beats per thread set, timekeeping through melody, the earliest metronome. And again, you realize something. No one is counting seconds. Time isn't something you fight here. It's something you sing along with. Outside, a young boy is helping his grandfather patch a wall with mud bricks. The elder squints at the sky, mutters about the shadow of a fig leaf, and tells the boy they have just enough time to finish before the breeze turns. You don't know what that means exactly, but sure enough, 10 minutes later, the wind shifts. This intuitive timing isn't just poetic, it's practical. In a land where clocks are luxury and the sun is your oldest companion, you learn to read the signs. There's even a festival your guide tells you based entirely around seasonal timekeeping quirks. It's called the Day of the Long Shadow, held in late summer when shadows stretch unusually far across flat ground, and people use them to play light games, dance in moving shapes, and, most importantly, predict the changing of the seasons. Historians still puzzle over whether this was official calendrical practice or just a local tradition. Either way, it sounds better than most New Year's Eve parties. You take a moment to sit in the shade of a home's side wall. The village hums gently around you. No rush, no sharp alarms, no to-do lists, just moments stacking like soft bricks, sun-warmed and simple. A woman brings you a cup of cool water and a fig. She doesn't speak, but she smiles like she knows you've just learned something important. Not from books, not from charts, but from watching, from noticing. You nibble the fig and lean your head back. A pigeon coos overhead. The oven stops smoking. The boy has finished the wall. And for a few long, sweet minutes, time pauses. Not because it's frozen, but because you've caught up with it. The sun has slipped behind the acacia trees now, painting the village in soft golds and long, leaning shadows. The sharp white light of midday has mellowed into something almost liquid, like honey warmed by breath. The air cools slightly. People are moving slower. Even the donkeys seem contemplative. You find yourself walking down to the edge of the village, where the earth begins to flatten toward the Nile. There, resting in the dust, is a peculiar object, a stone L-shaped sundial, half buried, and clearly not in active use. It looks humble, unassuming, even a bit lopsided, but it holds a secret. This little device, shaped almost like a carpenter's square, may have been part of a quiet revolution in Egyptian timekeeping. Unlike the earlier, more symbolic shadow clocks tied to temples and rituals, this version seems almost practical, workmanlike. Archaeologists found one just like it in the Valley of the Kings, near a workers' village, probably belonging to someone responsible for timing labor shifts during the construction of tombs. It's small enough to carry, durable enough to survive centuries, and just precise enough to say, breaks over. You brush away some dust. The stone is etched with neat notches, each one marking a different hour of the day, though, again, not equal hours like we know them. Remember, daylight was divided into 12 parts regardless of the season, so the length of an hour stretched or shrank depending on when you were. Still, it's strikingly modern in feel, functional, quiet. You can almost imagine a sunburnt supervisor glancing at the shadow and sighing, well, better get back to chiseling Pharaoh's second nostril. Historians still debate the full purpose of this L-shaped sundial. Some argue it was a training tool, used to teach apprentices how to read more complex sundials. Others believe it was for timing specific tasks, bread baking, perhaps, or ritual cleansing. A few even suggest it could be used to tell both time and direction, acting as a kind of navigational double agent. Regardless of its intended use, it's a beautiful reminder that timekeeping wasn't confined to the temples. It was out here, in the dirt, under the sun, held in the calloused hands of ordinary people doing extraordinary work. As you sit beside it, you catch sight of an older man across the way. He's carefully refilling a clepsydra, a water clock, much like the ones you saw in the temple. But this one? It's made of fired clay, not bronze. The markings are rough. The handle is chipped, but it works. He's not a priest, he's a gardener. He uses the clepsydra to time irrigation intervals, ensuring his little patch of onions and lettuce doesn't dry out or flood. Every afternoon, he fills it, waits for the trickle to finish, and then moves the water channel to a new row. He doesn't worship time, he cooperates with it. And as the water flows, so does the light. You start noticing them everywhere now. Everyday timekeepers. A young girl who uses the call of frogs to know when it's time to bring in the laundry. A merchant who waits until the shadow of his palm tree reaches the edge of his stall before packing up his pottery. A group of boys who begin their stickball game exactly when the western sun hits the first red brick in the plaza wall. None of them check a clock. They don't need to. They're surrounded by a landscape that tells them everything they need to know. They've calibrated themselves to the world rather than the other way around. Your guide kneels beside the L-shaped sundial, adjusting it slightly so the shadow lines up again. He doesn't explain. He doesn't need to. You watch the shadow creep forward a hair's width, and it's enough. It's enough to feel the hour tilt. It's enough to feel anchored, not by alarms or deadlines, but by sunlight on stone. You sit there for a long while, neither speaking. The breeze carries the scent of the river now, wet clay, reeds, something green and sweet you can't quite name. The horizon glows with that impossible Egyptian light, the one that made every god want to build monuments in its honor. And slowly, so slowly you almost don't notice, the sun dips behind the hills. The L-shaped sundial goes dark. But you're not lost, because now you've learned how to tell time the Egyptian way. Not just by devices or stars, but by noticing, by pausing, by watching shadows stretch, and by trusting that, even without clocks, the world still moves with perfect rhythm. The light is fading fast now, and you're walking quietly along the Nile, following your guide toward a small village dock. The air is thick with river scent, wet stone, tangled reeds, a hint of something musky and ancient, like the breath of the earth itself. Lanterns begin to flicker into life in doorways behind you, not hurriedly lit, but with the calm patience of people who know exactly when night begins. The Egyptians, of course, had a word for this too. This gentle moment between day and night. It was the hour of offerings, the time when families poured cool water over family shrines, laid out bread or dried fish for the gods, and whispered thanks for making it through another day. And just like sunrise ceremonies, sunset held its own rituals. Your guide leads you into a small courtyard where an elder is lighting a tiny brazier filled with aromatic resins. The smoke is soft, almost lavender-like, and it curls upward in perfect silence. He nods as you approach and gestures for you to sit near a low wall lined with clay jars. It's an evening ritual that's as practical as it is spiritual, meant to cleanse the space and more subtly mark the shift in time. You watch as the elder lifts a small copper bowl. It's filled with scented oil, probably lotus or myrrh. He tilts it just slightly so a bead of oil drips into the brazier with a faint hiss. One drop, then two. Then a pause. This is a kind of timekeeping too. Each drop is spaced out evenly, not by a clock, but by experience, rhythm, and memory. And the act itself? It matches the pace of the sky. Historians still puzzle over whether this ritual dripping, sometimes called oil timing, was standardized or personal. Some believe it evolved into an informal way to measure short durations, like how long a blessing took or when to end a prayer. Others argue it was purely symbolic. Either way, it's hauntingly gentle. You'd never find this on your smartwatch. As the brazier smokes, a young boy brings out a musical instrument, a curved lyre, strung with thick gut chords, and begins to strum it slowly. The notes are soft and deliberate, falling into a repeating pattern that seems designed to quiet your heart. Turns out, the Egyptians didn't just measure time with sight and touch, they also measured it with sound. In some temples, musicians played rhythmic sequences as part of ritual pacing. One beat for cleansing, another for prayer, a faster rhythm for dancing or processions. These musical intervals helped priests keep track of ceremonial timing, especially when the sun or stars weren't visible. In the pitch-dark belly of a temple, a drum beat might be your only way to know when the incense offering was due. Your guide taps lightly on a gourd-shaped drum nearby, mimicking a beat used in temple chants. Dum, 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 dum. The pattern is steady, lulling. You could set your breath to it. You almost do. You sit in the courtyard, surrounded by warm clay walls and fading light, and suddenly everything around you seems to breathe in time. The crackle of resin in the brazier, the strum of the lyre, the gentle hush of the river just beyond the wall. And you realize they didn't separate time from life. Time was the rhythm of the offering, the rhythm of the body, the breath, the prayer, the laugh. Even the meal arriving now, a plate of lentils and garlic paste, figs, and a chunk of barley bread, is perfectly timed. Not fast, not late, just ready. The elder smiles as you eat, not the kind of smile that says, "You're welcome," more like the kind that says, "This is how we've always done it," and you believe him. You notice now that the lanterns around the village don't all flick on at once. Some are lit when the stars begin to show, others when the night breeze stirs, and some, like a shy one across the street, wait until the very last orange thread disappears from the sky. This is what evening looks like in a world without minutes or seconds. And it's not chaotic, it's peaceful, rhythmic, true. Your guide finally leans over, and with a whisper that barely rises above the night sounds, says, "Now begins the hours of Ra's journey through the underworld." And you nod, because, you've learned to feel it in your breath, in the drip of oil, in the flicker of flame. Night is not the end of time, it's simply another rhythm, and you are welcome to follow it. The stars are out now, brilliant, scattered, and steady as ever. You step carefully along a path that winds toward the riverbank, where a few temple acolytes are gathering. Their robes flutter softly in the breeze, catching moonlight in delicate folds. No one speaks loudly. Everything seems to move in half steps and hushes, as though even the air is trying not to wake the gods. You follow their lead, passing under an arched gate carved with the likeness of Nut, the sky goddess, her body stretched protectively from one horizon to the other. Her outstretched fingers and toes brush east and west, and along her belly, you can still see painted stars, symbols of the night hours. You're about to experience Egyptian nighttime timekeeping in action, and unlike daytime hours, which danced with shadows and sundials, the night belonged to the stars. One of the acolytes, barely more than a teenager, leans over a plumb-lined sundial, mounted horizontally on a stand. It's mostly for show now, since there's no sun, but he taps it anyway, then gestures to the sky. A specific star is rising just above the eastern ridge. You can't name it, but your guide does. "It's Sopdet," he whispers. "Sirius, the bringer of floods, the opener of calendars, and right now, the first hour of night has officially begun." In ancient Egyptian temples, especially those with astronomical ceilings, the 12 hours of the night were charted by the appearance of deacons, small star groups that rose one after another like time's own parade. With no mechanical clock, priests and timekeepers memorized which stars should rise at which hour, and they would chant or mark each one as it appeared. It sounds like a lot of work. It was a lot of work, but it was also sacred. And here's the curious thing. This ritual timekeeping wasn't just about knowing what hour it was about protecting the sun. Because in Egyptian belief, the sun god Ra didn't just rest at night. He traveled through the underworld, battling monsters, passing through gates, and needing divine help to reach the dawn. Every hour of the night had its own dangers and its own guardian deities. The priests kept track to help Ra survive the night, so that everyone else could see the sun rise. Historians still debate how synchronized these deacon hours were across different cities. Did priests at Karnak time the same stars as those at Edfu? Were the sequences adjusted for geography, or did each temple follow its own stellar playbook? Whatever the answer, it's clear the stakes were high. To lose track of the hours was to lose the sun. To slip in the journey through night was to risk chaos swallowing the world. And so they watched. They recorded. They chanted. You sit on a stone step now, leaning back to take in the sky. It stretches above you like a giant living scroll, more stars than you've seen in years, maybe more than you've ever seen at once. Your guide points toward another one, this time a faint star just now peeking over a distant palm grove. "Second hour," he murmurs. There's no chime, no bell, just the soft sound of sandals brushing the earth as one acolyte stands and lights a lamp. Another recites a line in ancient Egyptian, a half-prayer, half-star log. Then they settle again. This happens every hour, all night. It's mesmerizing. You think back to the star clock you lay beneath earlier, the one painted on the coffin lid, with deacons and night gods and protective spells. It wasn't just for the dead, it was for nights like this, where each hour is not just a number but a ritual gate, a stepping stone across the vast dark river of time. The air grows cooler, and a slight wind stirs the reeds by the water's edge. A frog croaks, then another, then silence. Your guide leans back, arms folded behind his head, and says quietly, "People think the night is still, but it moves." And he's right. Even without clocks, even without ticking hands or LED digits, you can feel the night unfolding, the stars shifting, the temperature dipping, the rhythm of breath and breeze adjusting with it. A third star appears. The acolytes move again. Another hour slips past like silk through fingers. And somehow, you feel safer knowing that someone is watching. That time is being kept, not for productivity, but for continuity, for care, for all. You close your eyes briefly, and when you open them again, the stars are in slightly different places. The sky has turned, and so have you. Now it's late. The kind of late where even the frogs give up on croaking, where the lanterns have burned low and the stars seem closer than they should be, almost leaning in to listen. You're still beside the river, though the priests have withdrawn deeper into the temple grounds. Even the acolytes are quieter now. No more murmuring star names, just a kind of watchful silence, as if the night is too sacred to narrate. This is the 5th hour of night, or maybe the 6th. Time is soft now. It stretches like warm wax, pliable and glowing. You're not sure how long you've been sitting here. It doesn't matter. Because in ancient Egypt, this wasn't the time for work or worship. This was the time for dreams. Not sleep, necessarily. The Egyptians didn't divide night so simply. They believed dreams were messages, sometimes from gods, sometimes from your own shadow self. And yes, even dreams had to be kept on schedule. In fact, they had specialists for that. You're led now by your guide into a small chamber just beyond the temple courtyard, lit only by an oil lamp. On the far wall, painted in faded ochre and ink, is the image of a reclining figure surrounded by stars, serpents, and tiny hieroglyphs. This, your guide tells you, is the domain of the dream interpreter, a temple role as real and important as any astronomer. And those little images, they're fragments from the Book of Dreams, a compendium that listed dream symbols, their meanings, and their optimal timing. Yes, timing. Dreaming of a crocodile during the 3rd hour of the night might mean divine favor. Dreaming of one just before dawn, a completely different omen. Everything depended on when your soul wandered. Historians still argue about the origins of these dream manuals. Some believe they evolved from older Mesopotamian tablets. Others point to purely Egyptian innovation. What's clear is that these weren't just bedtime stories. They were cosmic reports. The interpreter's role wasn't just to decode symbolism. He or she also had to keep track of which hour of the night a dream occurred, based on the rising deacons and what gods were ruling that segment of the night sky. Because dreams weren't just internal experiences. They were intersections between the sleeper and the divine. You run your fingers over the wall painting, a figure sleeping on a woven mat, a lotus blooming from their mouth, and above them, a falcon-headed god holding a tiny hourglass-shaped jar. Time, even in dreams, mattered. Back outside, your guide explains how certain temples offered incubation chambers, quiet, protected spaces where worshippers could sleep overnight in hopes of receiving prophetic dreams. The famous temple of Serapis at Memphis and several dedicated to Imhotep, god of healing, used these chambers to help diagnose ailments or predict the future. Imagine it. You lie down on a stone floor, still warm from the day, perfumed oils brushed across your forehead. A priest sings softly in the background, and above you, the stars march on. Your soul, according to belief, might rise through those stars, visiting gods and ancestors, returning before dawn with whatever message was meant for you. No need for an alarm clock. You'd know the time by the position of the stars when you awoke, and whether the falcon god in your dream was facing left or right. You sit on the threshold of the chamber now, the night thick around you, and think about your own dreams. How rushed they feel, how tangled, how often you forget them before breakfast. In contrast, the Egyptians considered dreams so important that they timed their sleep, fasted before bed, and recorded dreams in tiny bound scrolls as seriously as one might record a royal decree. And what about nightmares? Those too were logged and carefully timed. Certain stars were blamed. Others were called upon to ward off darkness. You remember now the painted coffins with those cosmic maps on the lids. The journey through night wasn't always peaceful, but it was always measured. You glance up at the sky again. More stars have shifted. You don't need anyone to tell you. You can feel it. The night is advancing. You've passed through its middle, and soon Ra will begin his final ascent through the underworld. The final deacons are stirring on the horizon, and somewhere in the dream space between then and now, you understand what the Egyptians always knew. Time is not a trap, it's a tide, one that can carry you forward, gently, steadily, if only you're willing to float with it. So you lean back against the cool stone, watch the next star rise, and exhale, not asleep, not awake, just traveling.